Alright, howdy gents. Today we are going to do a preview on the upcoming new Men of War 2 RTS. Now the 1C company actually just dropped this announcement / reveal trailer kind of out of nowhere. They also published not only the Steam store page but also some screenshots to go along with it. So I thought, much like the sort of video I did on Broken Arrow a couple of days ago, we could do one for Men of War 2 where we look at the trailer, the screenshots, and just try and figure out what to expect from this game that should be coming out next year. Alright, so the trailer opens up with a shot of a German tank commander. This trailer actually uses quite a bit of CGI. I'm not really sure why they figured they would do that, unless that's going to be part of their campaign, which we'll touch on later. Anyway, it looks to be an early Panzer III. Then the camera pans up and we see this huge horde of German armor. A lot of it looks to be earlier Panzer IIIs and the short-barreled Sturmgeschützes, so this could be like Operation Barbarossa with the German armor just advancing through the Soviet steppes. This next shot isn't something I'm really looking forward to. It really reminds me of the horrible and, in my opinion, dreadful stealth missions in some of the Men of War games I've played. All power to you if you love stealth missions in Men of War. I despise them. Now this is obviously CGI, but I think it looks very pretty. I should add that I couldn't use the original sound for copyright reasons because there's a bunch of music underneath. And in the next shot we see the same P-51 with that red nose flying over German formations, dropping some ordnance. In a quick shot after, we see short and long-barreled Panzer IIIs engaging Soviet positions with what looks to be a KV-2 shooting its 152mm howitzer at one of the German tanks in the distance. Also, some Soviet heavy artillery is seen laying waste to German positions. This next shot is very interesting. We're looking over the barrel of an anti-tank gun. This one took me a second to find out, considering there's a bunch of burning Shermans in the background. I was intended to believe this was a M5 76mm American anti-tank gun, but I think it actually is a Soviet BS3 100mm anti-tank gun, and those Shermans must be some of the Lend-Lease vehicles sent to the Soviet Union as part of the Lend-Lease agreement. Then we see some Sherman 76s taking the brunt of Panzer III and Panzer IV attacks, while Sherman with Calliope rocket launchers harass them from a short distance. Some more quick cut stuff here, a KV-1 rolling past some German armored vehicle wrecks as it helps the Soviet infantry push up. A look at a bunch of Soviet tanks, a T-34, a KV series, and an IS-2 with the seasons changing. I think just to showcase that they have different seasons and infantry skins and stuff planned. Then initially I thought this was a Lend-Lease Sherman, but it looks to be just a regular American Sherman 76 and a T-34 flanking a Tiger tank from both sides and then knocking it out. The cut after that shows some city fighting. Actually, the very final shot of the trailer I think is exactly this shot just from above. We see a T-28 and two T-34 variants pushing onto German tanks. Of course, a World War II game with the Soviets wouldn't be complete without the Katyusha rocket launchers. I do appreciate that they're showing just the entire German battle group below being destroyed. And then, like I said, that final shot where we see the T-28, those two T-34s, they're going up against some German armor. Now we do see a Nebelwerfer in the bottom right, and what is interesting is this blue-red line throughout the middle. It kind of reminds me of what Steel Division 1 did, where you had this front line you had to push around it. So I'm not sure that might be a new game mode they're adding or if it's just to make the video look cooler. And that actually concludes the trailer. So now we can take a look at some of the screenshots, some of the information on their store page. Alright, so we're starting off with this late war Western Front picture. We see a small US and small German unit clashing over this intersection. A German 76mm tank, not sure, it could be a jumbo, it does look a little thick in this picture, is backed up by a regular 75 Sherman as well as some supporting infantry. Now a note that actually took me quite a bit of zooming to find out is that the half-track appears to have some sort of crew-served weapon in the back, most likely a mortar, and obviously also the 50 cal for that close infantry support. On the German side of this picture, we see obviously the Panzer III wreck and some retreating infantry. The Germans did manage to get a Sturmgeschütz, either 3 or 4, on the flank of that Sherman 76, as well as a Panther tank and German half-track with 2 machine guns and supporting infantry coming up as well. So our next picture brings us to another clash between the Americans and the Germans. So this time it takes place in a town. We can actually see a German Tiger's 88mm shell appearing to bounce off of that very lucky Sherman 75, as well as a 76mm Sherman, this time it looks to be a little thinner, taking aim at the Tiger. We see the Panzer IIIN with the sight skirts and the short-barreled 75mm gun, as well as supporting German infantry. And in the bottom of the picture near the Tiger, some of the infantry seems to be wearing camouflage tops or camouflage smocks, probably some form of elite / more expensive infantry available to the Germans. There's a lot going on in this next picture, and I really kind of tried to explain it to myself. We see an M16 half-track with that quad 50 in the back, supporting some retreating U.S. infantry, which is, by the way, backed up by an M5 Stuart. Then we see German half-track obviously engaging that infantry with a kind of rare Marder 2D engaging the American armor, and then we see these M7 Priest howitzers that are actually being flanked by, and this was to me very interesting, what is supposed to be an Italian Otto Blinda 43, but obviously, acquired or captured by the Germans. So this could mean that technically this maybe takes place in southern France or in Italy, seeing as the Germans did make use of Italian armored vehicles, especially after the Italian surrender to the Allies. A bunch of American soldiers lying in ambush for German armored units somewhere along a hedgerow. We see an M1 57mm AT gun as well as bazooka armed infantry. So as mentioned in the trailer, I actually really like those red-nosed P-51s. I think they're a lot nicer looking than the P-51 models we had in the previous Men of War games. Here we see some of them flying over a German formation, also with a ton of German anti-air in the form of both regular standalone anti-air guns as well as ones on the back of flak half-tracks. Of particular note is the German half-track with a 37mm PaK 36 anti-tank gun. Now this is kind of a rare version and wasn't seen very often. It looks to be protecting a convoy with, again, some of those camouflage smock units right behind it. So the Eastern Front seems to be a little less focused on in these pictures that they publish, but we finally get to look at one here. We see some Polikarpov I-16s fly over an ambushed German column, as well as T-26 and a BT tank engaging both a Panzer II and Panzer 38. Now obviously this is all a bunch of early war stuff, so this is probably right during the opening stages of Operation Barbarossa. We get a quick look at a battery of German Nebelwerfer 150mm rocket artillery firing in the background. Now I'm not sure if the reload animation will actually look like the one on the foreground, but it's at least very pretty to look at in this picture. Back to the Western Front we go, probably set during Operation Wacht am Rhein, or also known as the Battle of the Bulge. We see heavy German armor advancing past destroyed US tanks like an M10 Wolverine and also a Sherman tank. German Panzer IV supporting a Tiger, Panther, and King Tiger with 105mm Wesp self-propelled artillery guns in the back. Now obviously all that heavy German armor needs a counter, so here we see the American M26 Pershing tank. Now this looks like it's just a regular one and not the Super Pershing, though we have seen a Super Pershing in previous Men of War titles. So it'll be interesting to see if they do plan on bringing that back, but obviously as a special call-in style unit. This next picture actually gets me pretty excited. This is a German defensive line. We see a bunkers on PaK 40s. They're about to be overrun by Soviet stormtroopers with a flamethrower supporting KV tanks. In the background, you can see some German heavy 150mm howitzers. Now, secretly, like I mentioned, I hope this is sort of a nod to a frontline game mode. Now, obviously, frontline is not something that people used to play a lot of, but it was always a personal favorite of mine, which is kind of why I'm hoping this is sort of a hint or a nod to there being a frontline game mode, where obviously one side gets to defend multiple defensive lines with limited units, and the attackers have more or less unlimited units, but limited time to try and beat all of the defensive lines to get to the end. Not a lot of pictures out there to currently take a look at. This is already the last one, in which we see a brave T-34-85 crew about to try and take on a Tiger tank in a wintry town setting. Now this particular thing does kind of remind me of a scene from a movie, White Tiger, so maybe it's a reference, or maybe not, but it does look pretty cinematic from this angle. So besides the screenshots and the trailer, they also published their store page. I figured we could take a look at that and try and find out some more about the game. So personally, I never thought of Men of War games as having necessarily great single player campaigns, but here they mention wanting to deliver, and I quote, an epic narrative single player campaign, as well as having skirmish modes and of course multiplayer. So a bit further down, they mentioned there will be 2 primary, whatever the word primary here means, campaigns, one for the Allies and one for the Soviets. So it's kind of weird how either the Germans don't get a primary campaign, maybe some loose missions, or they'll just get absolutely nothing. We'll have to see what comes from that. Now they mentioned the reworked AI to, again, a quote, a fierce and advanced one, end quote, with also direct control making a comeback, and I again quote here, use the direct control feature to manage any single unit on the field at any time and change, upgrade, and repair equipment and vehicles, end quote. Does the upgrade part refer to grabbing, I don't know, a 50 caliber off of a half track and putting it on a Hetzer? By the way, very good idea, because in a Hetzer it's remote controlled. Little tip in case you've never done that before. It'll be interesting to see some gameplay from this down the line. I just don't really know if they're just referring to direct control in a different way or if they have a whole different way of using it. I do assume that with the closing of Men of War Arena, we will see some things from that game to return to Men of War 2. For example, the trench building system was one of the best things about Men of War Arena, so secretly I'm hoping they kept that for Men of War 2. Of course, I also have to mention how many units we can expect to see. Now, this is usually just a bunch of crap, but this time I figured it was interesting to take a look at it because they mentioned there's 3 factions. Okay, we get it, the Germans, the Allies, and the Soviets, with 300 vehicles. That sounds like a lot, but do they count like a flak 20mm as a vehicle? It holds infantry, so maybe. But here they mention 45 battalions, so quick math, 15 battalions per faction. What does that mean? Is this like a Steel Division / war game thing where you build a deck based on your battalion? Is this maybe a holdover from Men of War Arena? If you never played it, in Arena you went into a multiplayer game and you picked a battalion or a unit, and you had to buy units within that battalion. So an infantry battalion or infantry unit that you pick, you might not have access to Tigers, but you'll have access to, support weapons, good infantry, etc. So I'm not sure how that's going to work. Maybe you'll have to pick, let's say, Germany, and then you have to pick the Sturm Battalion, so you'll have Sturmgeschützes and Storm Infantry and some light artillery, but you might not have Tigers, etc. Again, no clue. We have to figure it out. It's interesting that they mention it, though. Now, last but not least, I do mention mod support. Personally, I think mod support, and especially Steam Workshop support, was what really made Men of War Assault Squad 2 a big standout title for the Men of War franchise. It really pushed it beyond what Men of War Assault Squad 1 ever was. So seeing integrated mod support could make a very big difference. Well, that concludes my preview of Men of War 2 today. There's really nothing else to go take a look at. I wish there was more screenshots to take a look at, but there is just absolutely not that much out there. I do look forward to learning more about the game over the coming months, and I can say I'm carefully excited to see what they come up with, especially regarding the whole multiplayer and battalions thing. Now, launching with the 3rd faction, unlike Gates of Hell, which only launched with 2, will mean that from the start there's more stuff to play with and mess around with, but Gates of Hell does run on 64-bit, and they're actively working hard on getting their game upgraded too. I guess we're going to have to see if Men of War 2 can run on 64-bit as well. Hey, it is 2021 by the time this comes out, 2022. Please, for the love of God, run on 64-bit. And we'll have to see what the performance will be like. In the end, it is a gem game, and gem engine games seem to not want to run that great at all times. With that being said, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Love to see you in the next one. Cheers!